everyone! Not too long ago, I released my Hoenn Region review video, and I'm really glad that y'all enjoyed the 4-hour length of that video. I'll likely do my reviews like that from here on out, instead of breaking it up into 2 parts. That way y'all can just watch it all in one go. I think that's how I prefer to consume my content, so I figured maybe that's how y'all like it too. Anyway, in my region reviews, I dive into 10 different categories that I believe really shape what a region is all about. I then rate how well the region stacks up in each category, giving it a score between 1 and 5 based on its performance. And by the end of it all, we have a pretty good idea as to how fantastic or lackluster a region really is. Hoenn scored pretty well, ultimately ending up with a score of 4.2 out of 5. Though I did give it some bonus points, which left it with a score of 4.5. Hoenn is an absolutely fantastic region. It's one of my all-time favorites, but it isn't without its flaws. So in this video, I will be deep diving into all of Hoenn's shortcomings in each category that didn't quite hit a perfect score of 5. We'll be rolling up our sleeves and making some repairs and some renovations to bring this region up to its full potential of a perfect 5 out of 5 score. So grab a seat, grab a snack, and grab your toolbox, and let's identify the areas that need a little TLC in this Hoenn Region Repair. I'm Sabrina, and you're watching Saffron City TV. Welcome back, everyone. Before we begin, let me just suggest that if you haven't seen the Hoenn Region review, you should probably check that video out first, since it'll provide context for this video. You might be a little confused about how I'm going about repairing the region if you haven't seen what went wrong with the region to begin with, or how I go about reviewing a region in general. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It'll be linked at the end screen and located at the top of the screen now. A final point I'd like to mention before we begin is that when I recommend changes to these regions, I'm only interested in making changes that would have been possible given the technology at the time of the game's creation. For example, the ability to soar on the backs of Latios and Latias hadn't been invented in the games until Generation 6. Therefore, it would be unreasonable of me to suggest that it should have been available in the Gen 3 games, That goes for Ride Pokémon, the Rotom Bike, Overworld Pokémon spawns, and any other mechanic that hadn't been conceptualized, invented, or implemented until a later game's development. In other words, I'm gonna have to get crafty with the same technological restraints that Game Freak had at the time. And that pretty much covers everything I wanted to discuss, so let's jump into the first category from the Hoenn Region review that needs some repair. Town and City Design and Aesthetic. Hoenn's towns and cities are like a mixed bag of treasures. Many of them are buzzing with excitement, offering a plethora of activities to keep you entertained for hours. But let's be real, some of these places have literally nothing going on in them. It's a shame because Hoenn has a reputation for providing us with some iconic locales. Places like Mauville, Rustboro, Slateport, and Lily Cove are jam-packed with cool stuff, while unfortunately some of Hoenn's other cities and towns are objectively lacking in interesting sites, events, or fun activities. They're kind of the ones that are most likely to fade into obscurity. In Hoenn, these locations would be Oldale Town, Petalburg City, Dewford Town, Lava Ridge, and Pacific-Log, but you could make an argument that some other cities and towns are also somewhat lacking in reasons to revisit, like Verdanturf, Fall Arbor, Fort Tree City, and most unfortunately, Suitopolis City. This resulted in Generation 3 receiving a score of 3.5, Generation 6 got a score of 4, and Hoenn overall received a score of 3.75 in the Hoenn Region review. So, let's repair this, shall we? One thing about Hoenn cities and towns is that every single one of them has this iconic aesthetic flair to them that make them memorable no matter what, with the exception of 2 places in particular, and they would be Oldale and Petalburg. Oldale is probably the biggest offender of lackluster town design. It's literally just 2 houses, a Pokemon Center, and a Pokemart. There isn't anything visually interesting going on here. Even the houses are kinda bland. I guess this kinda makes sense, as Oldale seems like it was intended to be just a small town where people come to settle down, but honestly, Oldale is probably the single most forgettable and uninteresting place in the entire region, with no aesthetic charm or reasons to revisit. Thankfully, I've got some ideas to improve upon this. Since Oldale is the first town you can visit outside of Littleroot after obtaining your starter Pokemon, I think it would be nice if in Gen 6, we relocated some of the move tutors from Mauville to Oldale. Specifically, the ones that can teach your starter Pokemon Grass, Water, and Fire Pledge, and Frenzy Plant, Blast Burn, and Hydro Cannon. However, I don't think that they should be offered immediately. I think that the player should have to have high friendship with their starter Pokemon before the tutor will teach their Pokemon Grass, Water, or Fire Pledge. That way, a significant amount of effort has to be put into your Pokemon before you can actually access these moves. Otherwise, it would make the games a little too easy early on. The pledge moves didn't exist in Gen 3. So instead, I'd have the tutor teach any of your Pokemon the moves Ember, Absorb, and Water Gun at any level, regardless of friendship. That way, if you ever accidentally delete one of these moves on your starter Pokemon early on, you can always relearn it, and it'll give you the opportunity to teach other Pokemon useful moves at the beginning of the game. However, this too could actually make the games a little too easy in the beginning. So to avoid that, we could make it to where this tutor is only available after the player has gotten their first badge from Roxanne. That way, you wouldn't be tempted to teach your starter these moves before they would naturally learn them via level up, and Roxanne could still maintain her difficulty at this point in the game. Frenzy Plant, Blast Burn, and Hydro Cannon can keep their same criteria, with your starter needing to be fully evolved with max friendship before the tutor will teach these moves to your starter in both generations. I also think we should move the name rater from Slateport to Oldale in both gens. I reckon that this will give players an additional reason to revisit in the event that they didn't nickname a Pokemon or want to change its nickname later. In addition, Surge Master 2012 made a great suggestion in the comments of a previous video. They suggested that the guy who is searching for footprints in Oldale could help indicate if there are swarms of Pokemon in a particular area. The player could check in with the footprint researcher once a day to see if there are any swarms of rare Pokemon, and maybe he'd say something like, "Today I was researching Pokemon footprints on Route 102 and noticed that there were more Surskit tracks than normal. They must be swarming on that route today." Currently, Pokemon do swarm in Hoenn, but only after you've entered the Hall of Fame. I say swarms should be available before the Hall of Fame for one Pokemon on one route each day until the day changes. This could help trainers encounter rarer Pokemon like Surskit, Skitty, Abra, Mawile, Sableye, Zangoose, Seviper, Skarmory, Feebas, Bagon, Chimecho, Metatite, and other rare Pokemon a little easier. I think if we give more significance to the folks here in Oldale, it might spice things up a bit and add a touch more excitement to the place without actually diminishing its small town feel. I do appreciate that it's a small town, and we don't need to add a whole bunch of structure or crazy things going on here in order to make this place just slightly more exciting. Next is Petalburg City. Outside of the gym with Big Daddy Norman and Wally's parents' house, there really isn't anything going on in this quote-unquote city. I have an idea that would keep trainers returning to this place, however. RSC and Oris are the only games where the player's father is actually present, except he isn't actually present. He's kind of an absent father, spending literally every single day and night at the Petalburg gym. Your dad does make a small appearance back at home after the player becomes champion, but outside of that, we never really even see Norman outside of the gym battle. which is odd. If Hoenn and Pokémon were both real, and a gym leader actually had a kid who was setting out on their own journey to become a Pokémon master, I'd imagine that their gym leader parent would be spending tons of time with their kid, teaching them how to battle, introducing them to new Pokémon they've never seen, informing them on how to raise Pokémon properly,
etc., etc., etc.
So let's repair Petalburg by making it happen. Let's have Norman train the player on strategy and best practices, like a loving father would. How about after the player obtains each gym badge, they can have a battle with Norman. Each time, Norman will use a set of Pokémon that would only be slightly higher than the previous gym leader's team. Of course, he'd still use normal types, but would use them to teach the player about certain mechanics, like the usefulness of having your Pokémon hold berries during battle, powering up using certain moves that give a 2-point buff, like Swords Dance, demonstrating how important abilities are, teaching the player about status conditions and effects like evasion, infatuation, and confusion, and so on. His gym actually kinda does this already by having rooms with gym trainers in them that focus on different battle strategies and often use X items in battle. So, I think that by the time the player challenges Norman at his gym, the player should already know how to tackle his gym trainers because our dad taught us how to. Essentially, his gym challenge would be a more apparent test of your knowledge and skills up to this point. And of course, after you defeat Norman and obtain his badge, he would still teach you about certain mechanics that may be a little more obscure, like using battle strategies that involve non-damaging moves. He can even teach the player about EVs and IVs. Not to mention, your Pokémon would also gain experience by having these battles with Norman as well, and we could even have him give the player some rewards for defeating him in battle each time. I just think the player's dad should be more involved in the player's journey, And I think this would incentivize the player to return to Petalburg multiple times during their playthrough for more reasons than just to pass by. Now, Dewford Town is an odd case, because technically it does give the player a reason to revisit to change the trendy phrase at Dewford Hall. However, it isn't a particularly good reason to revisit, because all it does is change the 6 random tiles that Phoebus can be found on Route 119 to another 6 random tiles. It doesn't increase your odds at actually finding Phoebus, so I've never found this to be particularly helpful. However, I think that it should still keep its functionality for those who do find this feature to be helpful, but I think the trendy phrase should serve more than one purpose. I think I'd make it to where once a day, the player can change the trendy phrase and receive a heart skill as a prize for being a trendsetter. And after the player has changed it every day for a week, Dewford Hall will begin giving the player a big pearl each time they change it after that. Because at that point, you're just straight up an influencer. And technically, you'd be getting paid 3,750 Poké every single day just for influencing Hoenn's trends. However, as it stands, I don't think I've ever heard anyone else in the entire region mention the trendy phrase at all. It can't possibly be that trendy if literally 0 people are talking about it. So yeah, as of now, I actually don't think the trendy phrase is the hottest thing in cool. So let's change this to where trainers and other NPCs around the region will mention the trendy phrase in routine communication. That way you can actually experience the trends in real time. Next up, let's discuss Lava Ridge. Lava Ridge doesn't really need that much repair. In Gen 6, there's a lady here who will sell the player Moo Moo Milks, and it's certainly incentivized me to revisit Lava Ridge. I say, let's just make this possible in Gen 3 as well. I don't see why not.
Oh my god, that was so funny!
Speaking of why not and generational differences, there is an elderly woman in Lava Ridge who will give the player an egg that will eventually hatch into a why not. However, in Oris, after you defeat the Pokemon League, she'll give you a second egg that will hatch into a Togepi. I think we could have this applied to the Gen 3 games as well. There's nothing preventing it from being possible, right? Another thing that is only available in the Gen 6 games as far as Hoenn is concerned is the reflexology services in Mauville. This allowed the player to increase their friendship with their Pokemon once a day by getting them groomed at this place for free. However, I don't think it should be available in Mauville. I think the reflexology services should be moved to Lava Ridge. Johto's Goldenrod City offered a very similar service, so I don't see why this Pokemon grooming parlor can't exist in RSE, and I would make it available in the Gen 3 games. This place is already renowned for its relaxing hot springs. Why not enhance the experience by offering grooming as a spa service? I think it would incentivize the player to revisit Lava Ridge every day, at least for a little while, you know? The final city that requires some repair would be Pacifidlog. There just isn't any reason to come here unless you're looking for Mirage Island or trying to get your hands on the TMs for return, which I suppose are incentives to revisit. But honestly, you could totally accidentally skip over this city if you never traveled west of Sky Pillar. So let's make it more appealing to visit this place, shall we? First things first, Pacifidlog's population is very familiar with fishing and diving. As a matter of fact, the ancestors of the Pacifidlog folk lived their entire lives aboard ships because they were apparently searching for something. I'm not sure what they were searching for, per se, but I doubt it was Sky Pillar, as I'm convinced that this massive landmark would be pretty difficult to miss over a lifetime spent in Hoenn's oceans. You might assume that they've been searching for the Reggie trio, given that some folk in the town will talk with you about these legends, but 2 of the 3 Reggies are located in caves on land, so I'm just not really sure. I mean, I suppose it's possible, but personally, I think they were searching for Mirage Islands. Now, you'd think that this would be a fruitless effort, considering that Mirage Island in the Gen 3 games only has Wynot for wild Pokemon spawns and only a single Lychee berry on it. But I think searching for these islands would actually be quite fruitful. The only way to get a Lychee berry is from Mirage Island. You literally can't find them anywhere else in the game. So I think it would make sense if we made it possible to visit multiple Mirage Islands in Gen 3 that contained the other unobtainable berries, like the Ganlon, Salac, Apricot, Landsat, Starf, and Patea berries. You know, 1 Mirage Island for each of them. I know the Landsat and Starf berries are given to you from Scott after obtaining all 7 of the Frontier symbols, both silver and gold respectively, but that's a pretty difficult task and they aren't actually available in the region itself. I think all of the Mirage Islands should remain incredibly rare, though maybe a little less rare than they currently are, and the man who spots them should tell you where they're located. I also think they should contain more Pokemon spawns outside of just Wynot, but I'll talk about that in the Pokémon Diversity section. But neither of those suggestions truly impact Pacifidlog itself. However, I think there should be a person in Pacifidlog that will sell these berries to the player at a very high price. You know, something like 500,000 Pokédollars or something. Oh, and this person would only have a single one of each of these berries. So you could only have one of them unless you grew more or searched for the Mirage Islands. I think this could apply to both the Gen 3 and the Gen 6 games. This could keep the player returning to Pacifidlog to determine their chance of finding one of the 7 Mirage Islands, and to blow big money on some incredibly rare berries, all of which produce gold Pokeblocks. Now, let's discuss some cities and towns that I think don't require much improvement, mostly because they're very aesthetically pleasing and also already have some incentives to revisit. Verdanturf and Falarbur contain either the contest halls in Ruby, Sapphire, and Oris, or the battle tents in Emerald. I think the contest halls were perfectly implemented in Ruby and Sapphire, but I don't like how they were treated in the subsequent games. I appreciate them being replaced by battle tents in Emerald, but I would have liked it if we could still participate in contests prior to reaching Lily Cove City in those games. Like, why can't we just make it a tent that does both? They could have battle facilities within them on one side and then contests on the other side, with maybe just a single berry blender inside. Regardless, even if we didn't do that, the contest halls need to go back to the way they were in Ruby and Sapphire. Back then, you had to rise through the ranks. You couldn't just walk into any random contest location. You would start out in Verdant Turf, or you would register your contest pass, and then participate in the normal rank. If you won the contest, you were then permitted to move on to the Super Rank, which was held at the contest hall in Fall Arbor. If you continued to win these contests, you would then head to Slateport to participate in the Hyper Rank, and then finally to Lily Cove, where you could take on the Master Rank contests in the largest contest hall in the region. This incentivized the player to revisit each location for each Pokemon they wanted to enter into the contests, and I really loved this aspect about the contests. But in Emerald, there was only the contest hall in Lily Cove, where you could rise through the ranks in a single location. This was fine because there were now battle tents in the other cities and towns mentioned. However, Oris made it to where you could rise through the ranks at any contest hall location in either Slateport, which is now the first contest location you can take part in, Verdant Turf, Fall Arbor, and Lily Cove. And essentially, you could just go from normal rank to master rank just in Slateport alone. There is literally no reason to visit any of the other contest hall locations. They don't even give out different prizes or ribbons. Zero incentive to take part in contests outside of whichever city or town you feel like participating in. This makes the other locations essentially pointless. If Game Freak was going to go this route, then they should have just done what they did with Emerald and just have the one contest hall in Lily Cove and replace the other locations with battle tents. But you know, remakes always love to ignore the third enhanced version's content for some stupid reason. If you ask me, I say let's go back to incentivizing the player to visit each contest hall location exactly the way it was in Ruby and Sapphire, and maybe also allow them to double as battle tent facilities on the side. I think that would be plenty to convince players to keep visiting Verdant Turf each time they want to have a new Pokemon engage in contests. Otherwise, Verdant Turf doesn't really need any more incentives to visit. It's a beautiful small town with lush green grass and some cute homes, and doesn't need any more hustle and bustle. But Fall Arbor, on the other hand, would also benefit from these changes to the contest halls, but I think we give the players just one more reason to revisit this place. Fall Arbor is literally described in the games as a farm community with small gardens and a town formed by scholars who gather to research meteorites. The latter description makes a lot of sense considering that Professor Cosmo lives here, and in Gen 6 he even gives the player an option to change the forms of Deoxys by interacting with one of his meteorites. I think this should also be an option in the Gen 3 games, though Deoxys is an event-only distribution in those games. Still, it should be an option, right? Anyway, it stuck with me while doing the Hoenn Region review that the first description of this town claims that this is a farm community with small gardens, but the gardens aren't actually in Fall Arbor. They lie on the outskirts of routes 113 and 114 next to the town. And I know I've heard some people say that usually that's the way it is in the real world, where farmland lies on the outskirts of the city or town. But the thing is that there aren't even any houses on those routes near the farmland to indicate that anyone even owns that land. And on top of that, the land is pretty barren. There are a few sprouts growing in the soil in Gen 3, but Gen 6 just has tilled soil with nothing growing in it. And real quick, I want to give a special thank you to my friend Sir Malo for creating the maps that you're about to see coming up in this review. He's very talented and even created custom tiles just to help show off my ideas. Y'all should check him out in DeviantArt. His information will be linked in the description below. Thank you so much for helping me bring all of these ideas to life, Sir Malo. I couldn't thank you enough. I say we make it more apparent that Fall Arbor is all about farming. Let's move the tilled fields into the town and change the soil conditions to loamy so that the player can actually grow berries in the soil. However, I think we add something special to this farmland. I say we give one of the residents some flavor text about how the soil in Fall Arbor is particularly fertile due to the ash that falls from Mount Chimney. And I think we make it to where berries grow twice as fast when planted in the soil in Fall Arbor. Apply this to both gens and bam, you've got a really awesome incentive for the player to revisit Fall Arbor Town. Oh, and let's not forget about Fortree City. Outside of the secret base shops, there's not a ton of reasons to revisit this place, but I do anyway because the visual aesthetics and the Fortree City theme are top notch, baby. However, since secret bases are so important here, I think that the rooftop clearance sale that occurs in Lily Cove should be moved to Fortree. It could either take place inside the secret base shop or just outside the shop in the clearing on the east side of the city. Oh, and I think it would be cool to have all of the new items introduced in the Gen 6 games available in the Gen 3 games as well, but sold in this clearance sale. As a matter of fact, let's just change the name of it to the Fortree Festival and boom, now you've got a reason to revisit occasionally. Also, I think it would be cool to have at least one Kecleon respawn within the city each time the player enters it. That way, it's more apparent that the folks of Fortree live amongst Pokémon, and this would also give the Devonscope slightly more usage. Among the cities most affected by the lack of activities within them, Sootopolis City stands out to me. This place, reminiscent of Santorini in Greece, boasts an incredibly crafted design and looks absolutely stunning. There's just one problem. There ain't nothing to do here. That's not to say that important events don't occur here. As a matter of fact, the Cave of Origin and the battles with Groudon and Kyogre occur in this very city. But after those events are over, there's not a single reason to revisit this incredibly iconic locale. I must change this. I'm hesitant to include a bug-catching contest or a fishing tourney as repair elements in this video, since they were already discussed in the Johto region review and repair, and I don't want to sound like a broken record. Plus, these activities are kinda Johto-centric, you know? Let's just let Johto keep those. But I do think it would be really interesting for Sootopolis to hold a treasure hunting contest. Instead of catching Pokemon as the objective for this game, I think we instead make it about finding rare treasures by deep diving in the routes surrounding Sootopolis City. This event would highlight the appeal of diving in these games and also make a fun activity out of it. And I think it would be fairly easy to implement. I say we have a 2-minute time limit, and whichever trainer comes back with the highest collective value of treasures could actually win rare items as prizes. These treasures would be hidden items, and since the player can't use the item finder while diving, they'll have to use their instincts to find them. There may be a spot of seaweed missing where a hidden item is buried, a rock with a treasure underneath, a dark patch in the sand, or a sparkle in the water that is only visible for a few frames. In addition, other trainers will also be searching for treasure, so they'll try to race you to these spots, and you'll have to keep your wits about you if you want to win. The route map surrounding Sootopolis would have to be modified during the event so the player couldn't leave the area until the event was over, and upon entering the Deep Sea Treasure Hunt event map, a limited but generous number of items would randomly spawn with specific event-based criteria. The treasures being searched for could be the colorful shards, which would be common, pearls, which would be uncommon, big pearls would be rare, nuggets would be very rare, and comet shards would likely only have a 1% chance to spawn during the event. However, there is a catch. The player may also inadvertently find shiny pieces of trash mixed into the bunch, though trash wouldn't be as common, maybe only having a 15% chance to spawn. The player could win a heart scale as a consolation prize. The third place prize could be a dive ball, the second place prize could be a sea incense, and the first place prize could be an incredibly rare scope lens. I also think that participants, win or lose, should be able to keep the treasures found during the treasure hunt. However, there's a secret prize I haven't yet talked about. You know how earlier I said that during the treasure hunt, the player could accidentally pick up a shiny piece of trash instead of a valuable item? Well, if the player finishes the treasure hunt and didn't find a single valuable item and only brought back trash, they should be rewarded. I think the judge of the contest should say something like, "Wow, you're really invested in cleaning up the waters of Hoenn and keeping our environments clean and safe for the wild Pokémon. And for being such an active environmentalist, we would like to provide you with the ultimate prize, a shiny love disc. We'd like to show you how much we appreciate your efforts and your heart of gold." Quite the compelling prize, huh? But it makes so much sense, and it would be very in line with Hoenn's themes of environmental balance and the importance of preserving the environment. Plus, it wouldn't be an easy feat. I wouldn't make it so simple that you could win a shiny love disc just for bringing back a single piece of trash. I think it should be at least 5 pieces, no less. And remember, if you find any other item of value, the secret prize won't be rewarded to you. So you'll likely have to take part in the treasure hunt a few times before you're able to win this prize. In other words, you'd be incentivized to revisit Sutopolis quite often. I really like the idea of a deep-sea treasure hunt for the city that can only be entered by diving, and I think it could be implemented in both generations of the games. I do want to briefly mention Evergrande City and the fact that it has no business being referred to as a city. I think its name should be changed to Evergrande Island. There's a Pokémon Center, Victory Road, and the Pokémon League building here, and that's about it. And it can stay that way, that's fine. The Pokémon League alone is reason enough to revisit. However, I do think that the stats judge in the Battle Frontier and Battle Resort should be moved here and situated just outside the Victory Road. That way, players don't have to wait until after completing the Pokémon League to decide whether or not they'd like to entertain IV breeding. It would also incentivize serious players to revisit the southern half of the island. Overall, Hoenn cities and towns are truly remarkable and iconic. However, it's very disheartening to see places like Slateport, Mauville, and Lily Cove City bustle with activities and have so many cool things to do within them, while many other locations remain barren and lackluster, despite their aesthetic charm. With these changes made to the cities and towns of Hoenn, I truly believe I could comfortably give Hoenn a perfect score of 5 out of 5 in the town and city design and aesthetic category. I'm also kind of proud of the treasure hunting idea, not gonna lie. Anyway, let's move on to the next category that requires some repair. Routes, natural landmarks, and special interiors. Hoenn is damn near renowned for its route design, memorable natural landmarks, and stunning special interiors. In the Hoenn Region review, I discussed how the routes were split exactly in half between landmass and water, with 17 terrain routes and 17 water routes. Conceptually, this is a perfect idea for Hoenn, so the Region Design and Biome Diversity category got a whopping 5 out of 5 score from me on that front. But there was quite an imbalance in implementation, as the water routes suffered tremendously in more categories than one. As far as the routes specifically are concerned, the terrain routes just blow the water routes out of the water. Get it? Anyway, yeah, the terrain routes are just so much more interesting, with berry trees, places of interest like the Trick House, Glass Workshop, Cable Car, and other nifty spots. You've got deserts and rainforests and fields of flowers, soot-covered grasslands, and all sorts of awesome incentives to explore. You know what the water routes have? Water. And rocks. Okay. There are still exploratory incentives in cities and towns to visit, but the routes themselves are frustratingly uninteresting. I understand that this kind of tracks with reality, but come on, Game Freak, the final third of the game is just so boring and bland. I say we spice things up in this half of the map by adding more cool things to explore. For example, I think there should be more boats in the water routes, like the one Mr. Briny uses. This region is literally half water and nobody is boating around. Everybody is just swimming. Yeah, I believe that as much as I believe that everybody was kung fu fighting. It also makes little sense to me that there aren't more ships that ferry people around, transport goods, or act as fishing boats. So let's change this. I think the players should be able to witness boats and ships sailing on the open ocean, and if the player interacts with them, maybe they could provide services to the player. Some boats could heal the player's Pokemon, others could sell the player valuable items or even a few standard Pokemon items. Some ships would chase the player across the maps. They would engage the player in successive battles, similar to the Windstrait family. Some boats could offer the player an in-game trade, and others may offer the player a ride to the nearest city or town. I don't think the waters would be packed with them or anything, but maybe like 7 or 8 a day would suffice. I just really think that having some boats on the surface of the massive ocean of Hoenn would be really freaking cool and totally doable with the technology of both generations. However, wouldn't it be cool if there were more mangrove trees on the water routes? I know they're uncommon trees, but Hoenn already has some locations that feature them, so why not feature them more often to increase the aesthetic appeal to these ocean locales? In addition, Hoenn's water routes already feature some sandy islands, so why not just add some grass, flowers, berry trees, and tall grass on them with unique Pokemon encounters for good measure? There doesn't have to be a ton of these grassy islands, but a few wouldn't hurt. Unfortunately, those are all of the ideas that I have to improve the interest on the surface of Hoenn's water routes outside of the wild Pokemon encounters, which will be discussed later. However, the dive spots in these routes certainly help to improve the water routes as it stands now, but I do think that adding some intrigue to the underwater areas could provide some additional flair. I don't want to butcher your name, so I'm going to put it up on the screen now, but this commenter had some ideas that I very much agree with. I think the underwater tile sets could have included some coral reefs, seashells, and forests of tall seaweed as well. The underwater areas already seem fairly interesting, but I think that adding some additional aesthetic charm wouldn't hurt. However, I also think there should be at least one sunken ship underneath one of the dive spots. A ship that has been lost to time, destroyed and decaying underneath the sea. You would basically explore this sunken ship the way you would explore the underwater areas of the abandoned ship or Sea Marvel. Only it would act as a cave to where every single tile within the structure could potentially yield a wild Pokemon battle. I also think it would be interesting to give this ship some lore as well, like this ship capsized when a large storm hit the eastern side of Hoenn. But I just think it makes perfect sense to have a sunken ship that actually resides entirely underwater. I think that just by implementing those few ideas into the water routes, we could greatly improve upon their route design and invite some visual intrigue into this barren ocean. The natural landmarks of Hoenn are pretty good for the most part, except the Safari Zone. Why the fuck did you remove the Safari game from the Safari Zone in Gen 6, Game Freak? How dare you deprive us of the joy that the Safari Zone once brought us? I know for a fact that it wasn't impossible to bring the Safari game to the Gen 6 games. So why'd you do it? Game Freak? We want answers. To fix the Safari Zone, literally all you would need to do is just include the Safari game that was left out from the Gen 3 titles. It should have never been removed to begin with. Madness. Absolute madness. But the Safari Zone isn't the only location that will be covered in this region repair. Some of the special interiors could also use a little renovation. I honestly don't even think I need to introduce any new ideas here, which is funny because most of the things I want to discuss are pretty much just big ol' oversights. I think that Gen 3 most certainly could adopt the history and lore of New Marvel without compromising the technological sanity at the time of the game's development. All the player would need to do is interact with some of the beds, trash cans, or shelves in the abandoned ship, and all of the descriptions of Sea Marvel and its tumultuous history could be uncovered with some additional text. Even adding the storage room with all of the goodies in it, as well as Rhizo Cosmo, would totally be doable for the Gen 3 games. You know, minus Spiritomb. New Marvel in Mount Pyre's interior would actually work in the same way, but in the opposite direction. Just have the Gen 6 games model the same interior designs of its Gen 3 predecessors and boom, all fixed. My complaints were essentially that Gen 6 watered down the intrigue of New Marvel by reducing the location size and removing the visual storytelling. Just copy the map and update the graphics and I'm happy. Same thing for Mount Pyre's interior. There's literally no need to church it up. Just let it be old. Let there be holes in the floor. Let it be spooky. Let it feel daunting to explore. Leave my childhood alone. Sorry, the anti-nostalgia hits home sometimes. Once again, Game Freak removed much of the visual storytelling when they cleaned the place up and remodeled Mount Pyre to look like a nice, comfortable place to mourn the dead. Get that shit out of here. I want people to feel terrified to visit Little Wurmpy. I'm just kidding, but I'm also not. Seriously, just copy the map, update the graphics, and stop removing the good things from the previous titles in the remakes, Game Freak. With the changes I've made, I now think that the routes, natural landmarks, and special interiors category is fixed. Now I could definitely see Hoenn getting 5s across the board in this category. Real quick, I have a very special announcement to make. Today, I am very happy to announce that I am partnering with ARTVANA, who is supporting a portion of this video. I'm so excited, y'all. Let me tell y'all about ARTVANA, okay? ARTVANA is a monthly art subscription box that's designed to ignite your creativity and inspire your inner artist. Each month, they send you this amazing box filled with all the goodies you need to create a masterpiece. I'm talking paints, brushes, canvas, the whole shebang. And here's the best part. They don't just stop at supplies. Each month, ARTVANA will send you a brand new project to inspire you, and when you do get that new project, you also get access to all of the past tutorials so you never run out of inspiration. With your ARTVANA membership, you also get access to coaching and tutorials from their very talented coach, Ricky. Now, I've got to be honest with you, I've never been much of a painter myself, but that's what's so great about ARTVANA. They welcome everyone, no matter your skill level. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, they're all about helping you tap into your creative side and build that confidence. And let me tell you, it's been so much fun trying out this project. I was really surprised at my ability to paint. I mean, look at this, y'all. I did this. Me, yes, me. And ARTVANA makes it so easy and comfortable to make works of art just like this. They've got something for everyone. From landscapes to florals to mixed media, they've got a whole range of projects to choose from. So there's always something new and exciting to try. ARTVANA is a great place to start to get in touch with your artistic side. And don't worry, you're never alone or by yourself to figure out how to paint. Coach Ricky is there with you every step of the way, teaching you every technique she knows. So if you're looking to add a little more creativity to your life, definitely give ARTVANA a try. Y'all go check out ARTVANA. Their link is down in the description below, and happy creating! Let's move on to the next category, shall we? Traversability and Transportation. In the Hoenn Region review, I gave this category a 3.5 for Gen 3, a 4 for Gen 6, and Hoenn overall got a score of 3.75. The best parts of traversing Hoenn include the twin bikes, the super speedy mock bike, and the wheelin' and hoppin' acro bike. Hoenn has the best implementation of bikes outside of Galar, but something I didn't mention in the Hoenn Region review, because honestly I didn't know about it until someone left me a comment about it, but in Oris you can follow a quest line and actually obtain both of the bikes. How cool is that? Either way, I love these bikes. I also love the cable car that you can take from Route 112 to the peak of Mount Chimney, and I always loved the little animation that plays when you ride up the side of the volcano. But for RSC, that's kinda where the fun ends. Of course, the running shoes were implemented in Gen 3, which was a great inclusion, but it still feels pretty bare bones, especially since HMs are still a thing. Now that we've got ride Pokemon and other ways to traverse the regions, HMs feel both outdated and restrictive. You have to plan your team of Pokemon around HMs, and may even need to replace team members for certain segments of the game. Plus, they take up a move slot and can't be removed until the late game. I know some people like the challenge of being forced to use HMs, and I know some people don't mind them, but I'm just in the camp that feels spoiled by the newer games and find HMs to be a bit annoying. Unfortunately, Oris essentially just took RSE's lead on this and kept necessary HMs in the games, so I just can't give Oris a perfect score here. The SS title doesn't really add much to the enjoyability of traversing the region. By the time you get the ability to travel between Slateport and Lily Cove on the SS title, you've already got the HM for Fly, and that basically renders this ferry ride pointless. Don't get me wrong, it is still useful, as it can take the player to either the Battle Frontier or the Battle Resort and other event distribution islands. That's all fine and dandy, but it still doesn't improve the traversability of Hoenn. So let's repair these issues, shall we? First things first, I will absolutely dish out points for Oris introducing the soaring mechanics to the games. This is awesome, this is super fun, this is freedom, this is the best thing that ever happened to the region. However, I think the Eon Flute, which gives the player the ability to soar, should be given to the player when they receive the HM for Fly. I mean, it can even come with some caveats, like not being able to encounter mirage spots until after you've received your 7th gym badge, and being unable to land in locations you haven't yet visited. It would essentially act just like the HM for Fly, but soaring is so much more fun, let's be real. I just think that this exciting traversal mechanic would have been better utilized a little earlier in the games, you know? However, this would only apply to the Gen 6 games, as I wouldn't be able to apply this mechanic to the Gen 3 games. But how can we improve both of these generations? Well, I asked my channel members for their input, and Silk Touch Ninja and I agree that there should be better transportation in the eastern half of Hoenn. Earlier I talked about how the SS title isn't particularly helpful for traversing Hoenn specifically, and I say we make it possible for the SS title to give the player a ride to any coastal location that the player has already visited. But then what about sweet old Mr. Briny? We love Mr. Briny, but he would be rendered useless, right? Well, currently in the games, after the player obtains their 7th gym badge, he actually becomes the captain of the SS title. So, I don't think it would be unreasonable for Mr. Briny to become the captain of the ship upon y'all's first visit to Slateport. You and Mr. Briny could go visit Doc together, and Mr. Briny could get some character development and a moment in the spotlight of the storyline. I think he deserves it, both him and Pico. After Mr. Briny becomes the captain of the SS title, he could then ferry you around on the SS title. Each time you visit a new city or town that is located on or near the water, Mr. Briny can ferry you there on the SS title. I think that giving the player the option to be ferried around on the water routes will encourage them to spend less time surfing on the ocean surface and actually get to enjoy the experience of taking a nice cruise. The catch is, the SS title would drop you off and then head back to the harbor at Slateport or Lily Cove. And granted, once the player receives the HM for Fly, traveling by means of ship might not be as useful, but there could still be incentives to utilize the SS title. For example, the player could battle trainers for money and experience each time they use this service. In addition, I have some ideas as to how this service would operate, and I'll talk about that in the naturally occurring phenomena category. But the SS title wouldn't be the only boat that would offer the player a ride. Remember earlier when I talked about the boats and ships that would be sailing around Hoenn's water routes? I think occasionally they could offer the player a ride to the nearest city or town as well, while they're out on the open ocean. Finally, I want to discuss those pesky HMs. The easiest way to solve this issue is to just place the move deleter in a location accessible earlier in the game, like Dewford Town or something. As a matter of fact, that's not a bad idea. It would give the player a little more incentive to revisit the island, and the player could delete HMs after obtaining their first gym badge, so there's a good little quick fix for you right there. But that doesn't exactly solve for all of the other issues that come along with necessary HM usage. Instead, I've decided on a system that would pretty much negate HMs entirely. Now, I didn't really come up with this idea myself. Many of you have commented in my previous Johto Region Repair suggesting this, or at least something like it, but I think I've made my final decision on it, and moving forward, what I'm about to discuss is pretty much how I'm going to fix and solve for HM usage moving forward for all of the other games that require HM usage. And here it is. Remove HMs entirely. Well, sorta, anyway. Let's just turn HMs into regular TMs, but replace the HM mechanics with skills. Instead of taking up a move slot, these skills would be listed on the summary page of the caught Pokémon, but since skills are typically learned, I think it would be perfectly acceptable for them to act like HMs, only being usable after the player had obtained a certain gym badge. Until said gym badge is obtained, these skills would be listed in gray to indicate that they aren't usable yet. And after the badge is obtained, they would be highlighted to indicate that they are usable. And realistically, any Pokemon that can learn any HM could essentially have the potential to learn the skill for that HM. For example, Zigzagoon would inherently have the potential to use the skill for Cut, but wouldn't be able to do so until Roxanne was defeated. Once the player obtains the stone badge, Roxanne would essentially teach the trainer how to utilize a Pokemon's Cut skill. Afterwards, Zigzagoon's Cut skill would be highlighted in its summary page, and after that, the player would be able to simply interact with a Cut tree, and Zigzagoon could remove the obstacle without ever having to surrender a move slot. This would apply to every HM or skill, as long as the Pokemon was in the player's party at the time of usage. Granted, this still may force the player to have Pokemon in their team that can utilize these skills to progress through the game, but it would be a hell of a lot less inconvenient as far as battle strategies are concerned, and you could still use a ton of unique Pokemon on your teams. I know that some people would prefer to go entirely the way of Ride Pokemon, but that mechanic simply didn't exist in those games like they did in Alola and so on, outside of Mega Latios or Latias in Gen 6. And I just don't feel comfortable with suggesting that they could have been implemented in RSC when that mechanic hadn't even been conceptualized at the time of their creation. So for every game that still utilizes necessary HMs, the skill system is my fix. Oh, and I do like the idea of the player needing to rely on their own Pokemon to progress through the games, and I'm not interested in giving the player tools like a hatchet for chopping down small trees, a hammer for smashable rocks, or a surfboard for surfing. I think that would diminish the connection the player has with their Pokemon, and would mean that the player doesn't need to rely on any Pokemon for anything other than just battling, and that just seems really wrong to me. This ain't Harvest Moon, y'all. Personally, I'd love to see a Harvest Moon / Story of Seasons type Pokemon game, but for now, I'm working with what we got. So for now, my skill system is kind of the best of both worlds, as I think it can be applied to both Gen 3 and Gen 6. And if we implemented better usage for the SS title, gave the player the option to hitchhike to a nearby location via boat ride, replace HMs with the skill system, and give the player the Eon Flute once they obtain the flying skill, previously known as the HM4 Fly, I could safely say that Hoenn would absolutely deserve a perfect 5 in the Traversability and Transportation category. Anyway, let's move on to the next category that could use a little bit of repair. Culture, Lore, and Immersion. Hoenn's history is this incredible tale of the balanced forces of Groudon and Kyogre raging against each other in ancient times, ultimately forging the region's landmass and oceans and creating what we know to be Hoenn today. Hoenn does a wonderful job of teaching the lessons of balance, karma, and coexistence between people, Pokemon, and Mother Nature. These themes are very prevalent, and Hoenn wears them like a badge of honor in every single aspect of the region, from its layout to its routes, natural landmarks and special interiors, and from its towns and cities to its antagonists of Team Aqua and Team Magma. Hoenn's themes are constantly firing on all cylinders. Needless to say, this category really doesn't require much repair at all. However, at the end of the day, Culture, Lore, and Immersion ended up with a score of 4 for Gen 3, while Gen 6 ended up with a score of 5, resulting in Hoenn overall receiving a score of 4.5 in the region review. This is simply because the motivations of Team Aqua and Team Magma in RSC were both quite vague and shallow. Unfortunately, this made it difficult to hold on to my suspension of disbelief, and their motivations seemed almost silly compared to the actions that they took. I mean, they essentially thrust all of Hoenn into environmental turmoil so that Pokemon and people would have more water to swim in, or that life could be advanced on land. I mean, what exactly does that even mean, Maxie? Like I said earlier, it's all kind of vague and hyperbolic. In the Gen 6 games, their motivations may still be quite hyperbolic, but you can at least tell that these men are thoroughly convinced that their ideas are literally the only way that true harmony or prosperity could be achieved. These games depicted these antagonists as people who were trying to do the right thing in the wrong way. And they still screwed up the environmental balance and harmony that already existed in Hoenn, but at least we understood why, you know? To fix this, I say that we expand Gen 3's storyline to include all of the extra dialogue and clarification of motivations from the Gen 6 games. You wouldn't even need to implement Primal Reversion for this, but at least the evil teams wouldn't feel so stupid. Plus, it would be easy to replicate in RSE, in my opinion. However, in order to truly bring Gen 3 and Hoenn overall up to a perfect score of 5, we would also need to implement the suggestions I made earlier in the video. I'd add all of the additional content from Sea Marvel in Gen 6 to the Abandoned Ship in the Gen 3 games, minus Spiritomb, obviously. Expand upon the lore of Pacific-Log and their wandering seafaring ancestors by adding more Mirage Islands, and copy all of the text and cutscenes regarding Team Aqua and Team Magma, and just paste them into the Gen 3 games. You know, minus the Primal Reversion and Mega Evolution stuff. And boom, we've got a perfect score of 5 across the board for the Culture, Lore, and Immersion category. Now, let's move on to our next subject for repair. Pokémon Diversity. Hoenn's Pokémon Diversity is absolutely awesome amongst its routes, natural landmarks, and special interiors. The terrain half of the map is beautifully decorated in a wide variety of Pokémon with a fantastic array of new Hoenn Pokémon representation. But that statement only applies to half of Hoenn. The other half of Hoenn kinda sucketh. And this is reflected in the scores for this category. Gen 3 scored a 3, Gen 6 scored a 3.5, and Hoenn overall came out with the final score of 3.25. It's a lot of bull honky, ain't it? As mentioned in the Hoenn Region Review, the only two evolutionary lines that you can encounter while surfing on the water routes are the Wingull and the Tentacool line. That's literally it. The madness. The sheer magnitude of madness. There is a 1% chance to encounter a Wailord and Ruby and Emerald on Route 129 in the games, but that itty-bitty little baby chance doesn't even come close to introducing any kind of Pokemon diversity for the water routes. And let's be clear, Surfing is currently the main form of traversal for the water routes, so needless to say, the level of bull honky going on in half of the region is off the damn scales. Some of this bull honky is mitigated by diving, and even less is mitigated by fishing. The Magikarp Tentacle and Wailmer lines dominate the fishing encounters so heavily in this half of the region that you could easily be fooled into thinking that that is all that the water routes have to offer as far as fishing is concerned. Oh, and Sharpedo kind of follows the same trend when fishing with the Super Rod. There are even a few mediocre fishing encounters that are locked behind the Super Rod, which isn't obtainable until you get to Moss Deep City. And by the time you reach Moss Deep, are you really all that interested in adding a Corsola or a Love Disc to your team? Yeah, I doubt it. You might want to try your hand at catching Staryu in Lily Cove or Horsey or Seadra in routes 132 through 134, but honestly, none of these lines should be locked behind the Super Rod to begin with. But before I begin the actual repair on this category, I first want to mention that I'll only be fixing the diversity issues by utilizing the Pokemon that already exist in the region. I'm not too awfully interested in totally overhauling the Hoenn Pokedex. I know a lot of people don't like the Hoenn Pokedex, but I'm just not in a position to change it at this time, so we're just working with what we have here. You may hear me mention something about adding Johto Pokemon to the roster, but honestly, I'm not in a position to revamp the whole Pokedex, so if that's a video y'all would like to see, just leave me a comment and maybe I'll consider it. I just thought I would mention that real quick. So, to start, I have literally zero gripes with the terrain routes, the natural landmarks, and the special interiors, so we're just gonna be focusing on the oceanic half of Hoenn for the repair in this category. First things first, let's break this up into 3 segments. We've got surfing encounters, fishing encounters, and diving encounters. The surfing encounters are the single most egregious example of the lack of Pokemon diversity in Hoenn. You've got 2 evolutionary lines to encounter here: Madness and Bull Honky. Those are your 2 choices, so choose wisely. This is ridiculous. Okay, first off, Corsola should absolutely be a surfing encounter in and around Pacifidlog Town. An NPC in the town literally tells you that this place is built on top of a Corsola colony. So why the fuck wouldn't you be able to encounter them simply by surfing here? They've gotta be pretty close to the surface, right? At minimum, Corsola should be accessible by surfing in Pacifidlog on Route 131 and Route 132. Also, I simply do not understand why Wailmer and Wailord can't be encountered while surfing. Whales have to surface for air. They're fucking mammals, for Steven's sake. Okay. They're not mammals, they're Pokemon, but they're based on mammals. Anyway, they absolutely should be found while surfing, so let's make them available on routes 124 through 130. I already discussed Wailord earlier, but a 1% chance isn't good enough for me. I say routes 127, 129, and 130 could sustain these giants, but they should be available at a lower encounter rate. Something like 5 to 10%. And if Wingull can fly over the sea, I don't see why Tailo and Swellow couldn't fly over the water on routes 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, and Dewford Town. This would still kind of keep them in the general area that they could be found on the terrain routes, so they wouldn't really be too far from home anyway. Also, why can't Sharpedo and Carvanha be encountered on the water's surface? I know Carvanha is based on a piranha, but sharks often do swim close to the surface of the water, so I think we should be able to encounter this line by surfing near shallow waters like in Dewford Town, Route 104, Route 108, Route 109, Lily Cove City, Moss Deep City, Route 128, and Route 134 near Slateport. Also, according to the RSE Pokédex, Luvdisc also apparently live in shallow waters and even make their homes in the branches of Corsola. So, I think it's safe to assume that Luvdisc could also be found while surfing in the same areas as Corsola mentioned earlier. But I also think you should be able to find them on the water surface on Route 128 near Evergrande and within its borders. However, I'd also like to see it appear while surfing on Route 109, since this Pokemon is often sought out by loving couples, and this route has a ton of people on it. And I think it should also be found on Route 122 near Mount Pyre, since many couples visit the area, and I think this sweetheart Pokemon could cheer up the folk that come to mourn here. And with that, I think we can safely claim that we've improved upon the Pokémon diversity for the surfing encounters. Next up, let's talk about the fishing encounters. A lot of great fishing encounters in Hoenn are actually just freshwater species, so they likely couldn't be found in the salty oceans of the Hoenn region. At least most of them got pretty decent distribution amongst the terrain routes, and that's really all I can ask for them. However, the fishing encounters in the water routes are dominated by the 4 evolutionary lines discussed earlier. One of the biggest gripes I have with the oceanic fishing encounters is that there's no reason why Corsola, Luvdisc, Horsea, and Staryu can't be fished up with the Good Rod, as opposed to being sequestered to the late game with the Super Rod. So they should be available in all of their current locations with both rods, in addition to the locations that I claimed they should be encountered by surfing. But the renovation isn't quite over yet. I think Horsea should be available in Slateport City with the Good Rod, as well as routes 104 through 109. They should be a lot more common than they are, in my opinion. Maybe Horsea shouldn't be available with the Super Rod at all, only Seadra and Kingdra. Currently, you can't even obtain a Kingdra in the games at all. I understand that Game Freak wants to incentivize players to trade, but in my perfect version of Hoenn, I think Seadra should be available on all of the routes that Horsea is available on, but only with the Super Rod, and Kingdra, on the other hand, would be found on routes 132, 133, and 134, with like a 5% chance to encounter them while using the Super Rod. They'd still be sequestered to the late game and would still be pretty damn rare, so I think this would be fair, right? I also think Staryu should be available with a Good Rod and in more locations than just Lily Cove City and the Team Aqua/Magma hideout near the city. Let's make Staryu available on any route that has sandy beaches on it and near most coastal cities or towns. Staryu should be available on routes 104, 105, 109, 124, 125, 127, and in Lily Cove, Dewford, Moss Deep, and Slateport. Though I think it would be acceptable for Starmie to be available in these locations with the Super Rod as well. These Good Rod encounters would help to break up the monotony of reeling in Magikarp, Tentacool, and Wailmer in all of these locations. Finally, I'd like to make 2 Pokemon available by fishing with the Super Rod that aren't available in the games at all without trading, and those 2 would be Huntail and Gorobus. I know what you're thinking, but Game Freak wants people to trade with others, and besides, those should be Deep Sea Pokemon since they evolved from Clamperl, which is also a Deep Sea Pokemon. And to that, I say, I don't care. In my perfect version of Hoenn, this couple of Pokemon would be available, but also very rare, and only by means of deep sea fishing. Deep sea fishing is a thing in the real world, so why can't it be a thing in the Pokemon games? So hear me out. I think they should only be found on water tiles that contain dive spots. Similar to Phoebus, except they wouldn't be random. They would be dive spots. I say give them a 5% encounter rate with the Super Rod on any dive spot tile. That being said, I would make these 2 the only deep sea fishing encounters that could be fished up in dive spots. I think Clamperl, Chinchou, Lantern, and Relicanth can stay locked to the depths. Finally, I think Wailord should be available with the Super Rod in all of the locations I stated that they should be available by surfing, but with fishing. And last but not least, let's discuss the underwater encounters. I already really like the underwater encounters, so this section doesn't require much repair. I say we make Goribus and Huntail available on the underwater sections of routes 124 and 126. Did you know that those are the only 2 locations in the Gen 3 games that contain seaweed? Anyway, I say Route 124 should contain Goribus with only a 1% encounter rate, but only on seaweed tiles of the furthest, most difficult to get to sections of the route. Same would go for Huntail, but on Route 126. As a quick side note, y'all remember when I discussed adding more Mirage Islands so that the player could obtain more of the currently damn near unobtainable berries? Well, on the Mirage Island that currently exists, the player can encounter Wynaut. And only Wynaut. I think there should be more diversity here, and why not? Okay, I'm gonna stop. I'm done with the joke, alright? I'm done. I think that Beldum should also be available on a Mirage Island. You literally can't get it anywhere in the games except as a gift from Steven Stone. So let's make this Pokemon catchable on the Mirage Island that currently exists. And while Emerald did attempt to add more Johto Pokemon to the roster with the expansion of the Safari Zone, I think we could add even more Johto diversity by making those that are currently unavailable in Hoenn available by adding a mixture of Togepi, Quillfish, Hoppip, Yanma, Murkrow, Misdreavus, Unknown, Dunsparce, Sneasel, Swinub, Delibird, Mantine, and Larvitar to the Mirage Islands that I've implemented in the Hoenn Region Repair. Plus, they'd be really rare, only appearing on the 7 very rare Mirage Islands that I've implemented. Whew, and with that, I think we've successfully repaired the water routes of Hoenn in both design and Pokemon diversity. If those changes were implemented, I could most certainly see Hoenn receiving a perfect score of 5 in the Pokemon diversity category. Anyway, we're getting close to the end of this region repair, so let's keep trucking to the next category that requires some renovation. Gym Leaders, Elite Four, and Trainer Classes. All in all, I actually really like the Gym Leaders, Elite Four, and Trainer Classes of Hoenn. However, they aren't perfect. Gen 3 scored a 4.5 in this category, Gen 6 scored a 4, and the Hoenn region overall got a score of 4.25 here. Thankfully, the trainer classes of Hoenn are just downright fantastic. There were so many trainer classes that were introduced in Gen 3 that really feel like they were tailor-made to the region of Hoenn. And I don't have a single negative thing to say about them. But the Gym Leaders and the Elite Four members are really where the repairs need to be made, so let's talk about them, shall we? Honestly, the Gym Leaders of Hoenn are some of the best we've seen yet. All of them are perfectly placed into their respective cities and towns, they're memorable, many present a decent challenge, and I really like all of them, though some of their teams are better in certain titles than in others. Oh, and by the way, the strength and/or competitive viability of the Pokemon on the teams of the Gym Leaders and Elite Four doesn't really matter that much to me. If a Gym Leader's team is unreasonably weak for some reason, then it'll likely become an issue for repair, but that's not necessarily an issue for Hoenn, and I'll explain why. I care more that they show off the Pokemon that made their debut in the region and that their Pokemon teams are a good fit for them. I hate it when gym leaders who are representatives of the best trainers in the region refuse to use Pokemon from the region. I'm looking at you, Johto gym leaders. Fortunately, both in Emerald and in Oris, the Gym Leaders teams are quite solid. However, I would contend that Emerald shoulders most of the responsibility for the excellence of the Gym Leaders teams. In fact, many of the teams in Emerald are better than those even in the remakes of Oris. So let's just go through and pick which teams I like the best, and any teams that I'm not a fan of, I'll repair. Roxanne's Emerald team rocks the hardest for me. I liked that they gave her 2 Geodude instead of just 1, though wouldn't it be cool if instead of having 2 Geodude in a nose pass, she swapped out one of the Geodude with either a Lileep in Sapphire and Alpha Sapphire, or an Anorith in Ruby and Omega Ruby. And in Emerald, she could rock both in addition to her ace. I know that Steven Stone also sports these rock types, but you don't actually see him use them until the very end of the game. Plus, these two probably share a love for fossils, especially considering that Roxanne's entire gym is themed around fossils in Oris. I just think it would be super cool to see her with at least one of the 2 pre-evolved fossil mons, as opposed to 2 Geodude, you know? Brawly's Emerald team works just fine for me. A Machop, a Meditite, and a Makuhita are all he needs for a perfect team at this point in the games. Same goes for Watson. I have no idea why his team didn't include either an Electrike or a Manectric in Ruby, Sapphire, and Oris for that matter. Oris really had no excuse to avoid this evolutionary line since he had both on his team in Emerald. I mean, come on, Game Freak, why the downgrade? Watson's Emerald team wins this round for sure. Next up is Flannery, whose Emerald team is also the best of the bunch. Her Ruby and Sapphire team are a good example of being unreasonably weak with only 2 little measly Slugma and her ace Torkoal. Don't get me wrong, Torkoal is great, but her 2 Slugma were just embarrassingly bad. In Oris, she just swapped one of them for a Numel, which is fine, I guess, but her Emerald team takes the cake by swapping out one of the Slugma for a Numel, in addition to adding a whole ass Camerupt onto her team. So yeah, needless to say, anything y'all can do, Emerald can do better. And it proves true for Norman's team as well. While I don't mind his 2 slacking on his Ruby, Sapphire, and Oris teams, his Emerald team did a much better job by adding more diversity and Hoenn Pokémon representation by giving him both a Spinda and a Linoon in place of the one slacking. I think this was a great trade as both of them add to the challenge of his battle. Winona is the first case where Emerald didn't exactly do a great job at improving her team. If it were me, I would just let Winona have a Swellow, a Skarmory, her ace Altaria, and let her swap out the Pelipper for a Tropius. This team would be the best for her in my opinion. Next up is Tate and Liza, whose Emerald team once again proves to be the best of the bunch. I love the additional Xatu and Claydol here. Finally, let's talk about Wallace and Juan. In Ruby, Sapphire, and Oris, you'll be facing off against Wallace for your 8th gym badge, but in Emerald, you'll be battling against Juan. Both of their teams still need some repair, though. First things first, they both need to just freaking evolve their damn Celio into a Walrein. There's really no excuse to have the middle evolution when their Celio are already at the level at which they would naturally evolve. That's just madness to me. But I also don't like that both of them sport a love disc on their teams. Many of y'all have explained that that's because they're performers and love disc fits their aesthetic, or that these two are lovebirds. But honestly, the final gym leader is not the place to be showing off a Pokemon that is this weak. I say we swap out the love disc for a Gorobus on Wallace's team or a Huntail for Juan's team. But yeah, love disc is cute, but it just should have taken the spotlight elsewhere. And boom, all of the gym leaders' teams have officially been fixed. Now let's talk about the Elite Four and the champion of the region. In Ruby, Sapphire, and Oris, the champion of Hoenn would be Steven Stone, the best champion for this region. But in Emerald, the champion would happen to be Wallace. Personally, I think the champion should just be definitively Steven Stone across the board. In my opinion, he's just the better pick. Did I have a giant crush on him as a kid? Yes. I thought he was so fine. But am I biased in deciding that the champion should forever and always be Steven Stone? Also yes. But for those of you that do prefer Wallace as the champion of the region, I will kind of discuss him a little bit here as well, since he is a pretty solid champion. But before I do, let me just say that 2 of the Elite Four members aren't really going to receive any repairs because their teams are fantastic or just about as good as they'll ever be, and those would be Sydney and Drake. Drake's Oris team takes the cake on this one, but Sydney is literally everything I'm looking for in a perfect Elite Four member. He's got a diverse team of true dark types that he had to have traveled the entire region of Hoenn to obtain, and I couldn't ask for a better Elite Four member than this Aussie badass. However, Phoebe and Glacia don't make for the best Elite Four members. The Ghost type and the Ice type are very poorly represented in Hoenn. Phoebe could likely get away with her team in Oris, but I'd just give her a single Bayonet, a Frostlass, a Sableye, a Shedinja, and her ace would be Dusk Noir. That would be a perfect team for her. However, this doesn't exactly fly in Gen 3. The best I could do would be to swap out one of her repeat Dusclops or Bayonet for a Shedinja, but she would still be left with a repeat. I suppose a repeat Dusclops wouldn't be too bad, especially since I'm giving a pass to Drake for having 2 Flygon, and Dusclops is very versatile as far as its movesets are concerned. I don't know, I considered swapping her out with Brawly since she's already kinda got the island aesthetic going on. Plus, we could reduce her team to a Shuppet, a Duskull, and a Sableye, which can be found in Granite Cave north of Dewford where the gym is located. And Brawly could also make for a very compelling Elite Four member with a team of Hariyama, Machamp, Medicham, Breloom, and Heracross. But I'm not sure that this would be a perfect swap. Dewford Town has literally no connection to ghost types, and outside of her aesthetic, I'm just not sure that she fits well into this location. Plus, both the Kanto and Johto Elite Four members contained a fighting type user in Bruno. Granted, in my Johto Region Repair video, Bruno was swapped for Misty, but still there would be a lot of fighting types in the Elite Four across the first 3 generations of games. I don't know which I like better, Phoebe having repeats on her Gen 3 team or Phoebe belonging in a town that doesn't really make a lot of sense for her and having another fighting type user in the Elite Four for the 3rd time in a row. Either way, Phoebe's team can easily be fixed in Oris, so maybe she just maintains her spot in the Elite Four. Which do you think is the lesser of 2 evils? However, there just simply is not a good solution for the problems that come along with Glacia. In Gen 3, she's got 2 overleveled Celio, 2 Glalie, and a Walrein. And in Oris, she just swapped out the 2 Celio for 2 Frostlass. No matter how you slice it, she's ultimately going to have multiple repeat Pokemon from the same evolutionary lines. Someone suggested that we swap out one of her repeat Pokemon for a Hail form Cast form, and as a tribute to MNJTV, I'd like to give that idea a hell yeah. But even then, she's still gonna have a repeat Pokemon. Frostlass and Glalie are fine since they're different enough, but that doesn't apply to Gen 3, and even in Oris, you'd still have to have either repeats of one of them, or repeat Walrein, or have an overleveled Celio, or some bull honky or another. I mean, there's just no way to properly fix this. Hoenn has only 2 Ice-type evolutionary lines in Snorunt's line and Spheel's line, plus Hail form Cast form as a bonus Ice-type. And this makes sense because this is a tropical region. There really ain't supposed to be a ton of ice here. I just don't think that the Ice type should have been chosen to be represented in the Hoenn Elite Four. And to finally fix this impossible issue, I'm about to do something I've never done before. I am going to scrap Glacia's entire theme. That's right, she's getting an entire overhaul. First, we're going to change her name from Glacia to Goldmary. Let's change her type specialty to Grass instead of Ice because it just suits Hoenn so much better. Let's make her dress Mint Green instead of Periwinkle, and let's give her a team of Pokemon that aren't already used on an Elite Four members team. Goldmary would have a team of Roselia, Ludicolo, Breloom, Vileplume, and her ace would be Blossom. In Oris, her Roselia would be a Roserade, I suppose. And while this team does contain repeats of the same evolutionary line, Vileplume and Blossom are different enough, and at least it isn't a repeat Pokemon, right? The Grass typing is just so perfect for a Hoenn Pokemon team. It's just much better than the Ice type. Plus, I think this team suits this new character well. Y'all let me know what you think about swapping out Glacia for Goldmary, because I don't think I could justify swapping out Glacia for Brawly at this point. Finally, let's discuss the champion. As I said earlier, Steven Stone is perfect and should have remained champion of Hoenn, but for those of you who really like Wallace, I say we change his team just a little bit. I honestly think his team is pretty solid for an Elite Four member or a gym leader, but not the champion. As I said in the Hoenn Region review, the champion doesn't have to be pigeonholed into a single typing like the rest of the gym leaders and Elite Four. Steven Stone isn't. So I'm not a huge fan of having an entire team of water types when we just had a water type gym leader for the 8th badge, and Hoenn is literally teeming with water types anyway. I say he can keep a few, notably Wailord, Gyarados, and Milotic, since they fit his gorgeous aesthetic and big personality, but I think he should be able to have other Pokemon on his team that also fit these themes. But I was struggling a bit to come up with ideas, so I asked my members, and they suggested that the remaining 3 team members should be Gardevoir, which I couldn't agree with more, in addition to Ninetales, and my final pick would be Masquerain. I think this new team would fit his personality, his elegant theme, and his performer attitude. Thank you to Silk Touch Ninja and Jacob Lee for all of your help. And with all of those changes made to the gym leaders, Elite Four, and champion, I think I could see myself giving Hoenn a perfectly perfect score of 5 across the board for the gym leaders, Elite Four, and trainer classes category. Okay, let's move on to the final category of this region repair that needs some repairs. Naturally occurring phenomena. As I explained in the full review, the naturally occurring phenomena is very odd here in Hoenn. The newly introduced weather systems in the region was such an innovation that it set a new standard and precedent for all regions moving forward. Weather in Hoenn works exactly as it is supposed to, and I love its implementation. But that's only one piece of the puzzle here, because for this category, Gen 3 came out with a score of 2.5, Gen 6 scored a 4, and Hoenn overall was left with a final score of 3.25. Needless to say, this category will likely receive the most repair of all of the categories in the review. Unfortunately, the day-night cycle was scrapped in Gen 3, and while it was brought back in Gen 6, it doesn't really serve a purpose other than to just make Hoenn look nice at nighttime. Not to mention, time in the Gen 3 games is very strange, serving very few functions, and there really aren't any days of the week. The significance of time is placed more on the changing of the days. In Gen 6, there are days of the week now, but they really only serve to dictate when a certain legendary Pokemon can be encountered, as well as the rooftop sale in Lily Cove, which I've now moved to Fortree City. Well, there is somewhat of an easy solution for Gen 3. If Game Freak could implement days of the week and the day-night cycle in Johto, then there really shouldn't be anything stopping them from occurring in Hoenn. So let's make it to where the color temperature of the screen changes with the time of day like it does in Johto and Oris, and add some weekdays. And while it is nice that Gen 6 will allow you to catch Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion depending on the day of the week, I just feel like there should be more significance to these days, you know? In Johto, the Magnet Train and the SS Aqua would only operate on certain days of the week and at certain times of the day. I think the SS Title in Hoenn should operate much the same by only being operational during standard business hours and only traveling to certain locations on specific days. You could still visit anywhere in the southern and eastern seas of Hoenn you'd like, but certain locations would be off limits due to poor weather conditions or something. That could add some additional immersion to this mechanic. Plus, remember how I discussed that the water routes would contain boats and ships? I think they should appear at different times of the day and on different days of the week as well. In Hoenn, certain NPCs will give the player random berries from a particular set each day. This would include a girl in the Pretty Petal Flower Shop, a woman in the northern part of Route 111, Kiri in Sutopolis City, and the Berry Master and his wife on Route 123. I think the day of the week should dictate which berries they hand out. For example, Kiri in Sutopolis City could give the player a Palm Egg Berry on Sundays, Kelpsea on Mondays, Qualot on Tuesdays, Hondu on Wednesdays, Greppa on Thursdays, Tomato on Fridays, and a Lumberry on Saturdays. All of the other berry-giving NPCs would essentially work the same way with their specific berry category, with the exception of the Berry Master's wife, who requires that you give her a specific phrase. I also think that the clearance sale, previously in Lily Cove, now in Fortree, should occur every Saturday in Gen 3 like it does in Gen 6. In addition, I think it would be cooler if the Trick House ran its different puzzles depending on the day of the week, instead of waiting for the player to unlock them by obtaining the gym badges. In Gen 3 there are 8 different puzzles, but in Gen 6 there are only 6 puzzles. I say we split the baby and have 7 puzzles available by adding one from the Gen 3 set to Gen 6 as well, and have them change daily with each puzzle being available on a particular day of the week. Finally, I think that it would be cool if the player could obtain a free Pokeball from the Devon Corporation as a thank you for all that our 10-year-old asses have done for this massive company. And I think it would be cool if the Devon researcher that we assisted in the Petalburg Woods was the person who gave them to us as well. Now, if the player visits Route 116 after they've delivered the Devon goods to Captain Stern in Slateport, this researcher will give the player a free repeat ball and explain that new Pokeballs will begin appearing in select Pokemarts. I think we should be able to visit him at the Devon Corporation each day, and depending on the day of the week, he'll hook us up. I say he should give us a Premier Ball on Sunday, a Timer Ball on Monday, a Repeat Ball on Tuesday, a Nest Ball on Wednesday, a Dive Ball on Thursday, a Net Ball on Friday, and a Luxury Ball on Saturday. I know, look at me, asking for free stuff. I'm so entitled. But we did save this guy's ass in the Petalburg Woods, and we also provided free delivery services for the company and didn't really get compensated for that. At least the researcher paid us in Great Balls later, but I just think this would be a cool way to show that there's significance to the days of the week here in Hoenn as well. In addition, I think we should add some importance to the time of day outside of just Shoal Cave growing berries and evolving Eevee in Gen 3, and the ability to encounter legendaries in Gen 6. This was mostly implemented in Johto by having certain Pokemon only appear in either the morning, daytime, or nighttime. However, it would take forever to go through the entire Hoenn Pokédex and decide which Pokemon would appear at which times. That is an entire project on its own, but if y'all would like to see a video like that, leave me a comment down below, and if enough of you say that you would like a video going over that topic, I'll make it. Don't tempt me. But for now, let's see if there are other ways we can make the time of day matter here in Hoenn. Currently, there isn't a way to rematch the gym leaders in Hoenn in either Gen 3 or Gen 6, and I think there ought to be a way to face these powerful opponents for at least a second time. And earlier, I did suggest that we should be able to rematch Norman for some father-child bonding and learning experiences, but something I'd like to see implemented in Pokemon games more often is to see these gym leaders exist outside of their gyms occasionally. Like, our dad almost never comes home. For real. Mom has got to be getting lonely. Even when we got a dad in these games, his ass is still absent. I'd like to see more gym leaders out and about, roaming their respective cities and towns after you've received their gym badge. For instance, after obtaining the stone badge, I'd like to see Roxanne leave her gym to study at the trainer school between the hours of 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. I'd like to see Brawly surfing the waters around Dewford in the late afternoon and evenings between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. Watson would be performing maintenance at the new Mauville power plant between the hours of 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Flannery could be enjoying a nice bath in the hot springs of Lava Ridge between the hours of 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. and between the hours of 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Norman would come home to spend time with Mom outside of standard business hours between 5 p.m. and 9 a.m. Winona can be seen protecting the residents of Fortree from the giant bug Pokemon flying through their windows during the hours of 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Tate and Liza would be hanging out near the Moss Deep Space Center, gazing up at the stars between the hours of 8 p.m. and 1 a.m. And Wallace and Juan can be seen putting on a grand performance for the locals of Sutopolis outside of the Cave of Origin between the hours of 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. I think this could even extend to the Elite Four members as well. I'd like to see Sydney trying his luck at the Game Corner or checking out Rydell's Cycle Shop in Mauville between the hours of 8 p.m. and 3 a.m. Phoebe could be performing a dance in honor of the souls wandering Mount Pyre's Peak between the hours of 12 p.m. and 4 a.m. Glacia could be seen skating across the ice deep within Shoal Cave between the hours of 3 p.m. to 9 p.m., or if we're playing by the rules of the Region Repair, Goldmary would be seen planting and harvesting berries on Route 120 during the hours of 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Drake could be seen chatting with Mr. Briny in the harbors of Slateport and Lily Cove between the hours of 5 p.m. and 8 p.m., and finally, Stephen Stone would be found deep within Meteor Falls, studying its limestone properties and meteoric activity and hunting for meteorites with Professor Cosmo between the hours of 7 p.m. and 12 a.m. I think each of the gym leaders and Elite Four should give the player an item when found outside of their gyms and the Pokémon League. This could be anything from soft sand and silver powder to evolutionary stones, berries, or nuggets. But as long as the gym leader can be found inside their gym, they can be rematched once a day. However, this doesn't pertain to the Pokémon League. The player can visit there and rematch the Elite Four and Champion at any time. They've got to be dedicated folk to be the best in the region, and when duty calls, they got to do the duty. And with that, I think we could solve the majority of the naturally occurring phenomena issues for both Gen 3 and Gen 6, but we seem to still be missing something. That's right. There's still no seasons. I suppose this kind of makes sense. Hoenn is a tropical region, and most tropical places in the world do not experience massive seasonal shifts as far as the weather and changing of the leaves is concerned. But I think there's another way we can address the seasons of Hoenn, and that is with festivals. Most tropical places around the world hold seasonal festivals even if the weather or the foliage doesn't change much, and I think they would be well represented in Hoenn. Before I dive into this idea with y'all, I just want to give another special thank you to Sir Malo, who helped me come up with the festival ideas here. He provided some great resources and gave me some good insight into how these festivals should operate. Thanks again, Sir Malo. You've been such a big help to me during the creation of this video. The region of Hoenn would have 4 festivals held in different cities and different towns across the region, and the quote-unquote seasons of Hoenn could change every 30 days. I think this could be implemented with the technology of the Gen 3 games, as I think it would be possible for the games to internally count each time the day changes for 120 days, and on the 30th, 60th, 90th, and 120th days, a different festival would be held. The counter would restart after the 120th day changes. The first 30 days would be spring, the following 30 days would be summer, the 60th day onward would be autumn, and the 90th day onward would be winter. However, I'd add a caveat that whenever the player started a new game, the day counter would randomly generate a number between 1 and 120, and the number generated is the day that the counter will begin counting from. That way, the games don't start out on the first day of spring every time the player begins a new game, and other players would be in different seasons at the same time. These seasonal changes wouldn't always be aesthetically represented, but there would be some slight changes in the weather at least. For example, I think the northern routes like 114, 115, 116, 117, and 118 would receive more rain during the winter time. And in the summertime, rain would occur all over the region with a higher chance of severe thunderstorms. But to me, the festivals would be the most exciting change as they would signify the beginning of a new season. The first festival of the season would be the annual Petalburg Cherry Blossom Festival. During springtime in Hoenn, I think it would be interesting if many of the southwest areas of the region sported some cherry blossom trees, especially in Petalburg. There would be an NPC here giving out free fresh water and other NPCs handing out lepa berries and talking about how beautiful the cherry blossoms are as they danced through the town. Wouldn't that be cute? Of course, this festival would only last for a day, but the cherry blossoms would remain until summertime. Summertime would be welcomed by the residents of Slateport south of the city on Route 109, where a grand festival is taking place on the beach. The festival would have stalls giving out lava cookies, selling special Poké Dolls. There would be flags and balloons all over the beach, festive music, and folks talking about the upcoming weather changes. The festival in the fall would be held in Oldale Town, and they would be hosting the annual Chrysanthemum Festival. Oldale would begin displaying beautiful flowers, and the residents would be handing out citrus berries. I also think it would be cool if one of the NPCs would offer to purchase tiny mushrooms and big mushrooms from the player at a higher price during this festival. Finally, the Winter Festival will be held in Fall Arbor. This festival would be reminiscent of the Tamaseri Festival in Kyushu, Japan. This festival is typically held in January, and a few hundred men usually participate in a game of piggyback keep away with a wooden ball. But the reason that this game fits Hoenn really well is because the two teams are split up into the land team and the sea team. If the land team wins, the locals anticipate a bountiful harvest. If the sea team wins, the locals expect a great fishing season. I swear this festival game couldn't be more well-suited to the Hoenn region. However, in Fall Arbor, instead of people piggybacking on each other to play this festival game, they would simply dress up as Team Aqua or Team Magma and try to keep the wooden ball away from the opposing team. I think it would be cool if the player also got to take part in this event. Depending on which team wins, I think it would be cool if evolutionary stones were given out as prizes. The Fire Stone, Sunstone, and Leaf Stone would be given to the player if the land team wins, and following the event, the locals would talk about this upcoming year being a great year for berry farmers. If the sea team wins, the Water Stone, Moonstone, and Thunderstone would be given to the player, and the locals would be chatting about how much the fish Pokemon will be biting this year. And with those changes made, I can certainly see Hoenn receiving a perfect score of 5 out of 5 for this category. And that covers all of the region repairs and renovations that I would like to make to the region of Hoenn. Honestly, Hoenn is quite a fantastic region as it is and doesn't require that much repair. And even though I did suggest quite a few repairs, Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, and Oris still hold up as fantastic games to this day. Flaws and all. Some of Hoenn's flaws are actually pretty significant, like the entire eastern half of the whole region. Some issues, like the necessity for HMs, will continue to be repaired with future reviews of games. And other repairs are quite small, like adding all of the content that was left out of Oris from the Gen 3 games, and in particular Emerald, especially the Safari game. But I will admit, if Hoenn's issues were repaired using the methods that I described in this video, then I really do think that Hoenn could be considered one of the most perfect regions of all. Anyway, what do you think about my region repairs for Hoenn? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know if there's something that I haven't covered or haven't considered, or if there's a way that you would differently repair the region of Hoenn. I want to give a special thank you to my Marsh Badge members Jacob Lee, Sakayo, Silk Touch Ninja, Malevolent Minen, and the Tony485. Y'all's support helps keep the dream alive, and I couldn't thank you enough. Y'all are the snazziest. And I also want to thank Sir Malo for creating some of the maps used in this video and helping me with the idea of bringing festivals to the Hoenn region. He's highly talented, and you should definitely check him out on DeviantArt. His page is linked in the description below. Would you also like to support the channel and help my videos get seen by other people who love Pokemon regions? You can do so for free by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And hit the bell icon if you want to be notified when I drop a random upload. If you'd like to support the channel in other ways, you can become a Marsh Badge member and get your YouTube handle shouted out at the end of my videos, as well as receive other perks and bonuses. And if you just want to say thank you by buying me a cup of coffee, you can now that I have a Ko-fi account. It'll be linked in the description as well. Anyway, thanks again for tuning in, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!